Have you ever had to choose between love and your sanity? My name is Jessica. I'm 28 years old, and today I'm going to share with you the story that almost destroyed my 3-year relationship. It all started with a photo on WhatsApp. A little abandoned puppy that my boyfriend found on the street. Sounds innocent, right? But that simple image triggered one of the most intense fights we've ever had. Because sometimes, what seems to be about love for animals is actually about control, responsibility, and boundaries we should never have to set with someone we love. I'm sharing this because I genuinely don't know if I'm being reasonable or if I'm the villain in this story. My boyfriend thinks I'm heartless. His family thinks I'm selfish. Even some of our mutual friends have taken sides. But I need you to hear the whole truth before you judge me. This isn't just about dogs. This is about what happens when good intentions collide with reality, when love for animals becomes an obsession, and when you realize the person you're dating might not be who you thought they were. It was a rainy Thursday evening in October when my phone buzzed with that fateful message. I was cooking dinner in our shared apartment in Austin, Texas, something I'd been looking forward to all day. Work had been stressful. I'm a marketing coordinator for a tech startup, and we were in the middle of launching a major campaign. The message was from my boyfriend Mark, along with a photo that made my heart sink and soar at the same time. There was this tiny golden retriever mix, maybe 8 weeks old, sitting in a cardboard box outside a grocery store. The puppy was soaking wet, shivering, with the saddest eyes I'd ever seen. Mark's message was simple. Someone just dumped this baby here and he's asking if we can take him home. My immediate reaction was panic. We already had Buster, our 2-year-old German Shepherd mix that Mark had insisted on adopting 6 months into our relationship. Buster was a handful, high energy, still not fully house-trained despite our best efforts, and had separation anxiety that resulted in destroyed furniture whenever we left him alone for more than a few hours. Our apartment was a modest 1-bedroom in a complex that barely tolerated 1 dog, let alone 2. We'd already received noise complaints from neighbors about Buster's barking, and our security deposit had taken a hit from the scratched hardwood floors and chewed baseboards. But looking at that photo, how could anyone say no? The puppy looked so helpless, so scared. Part of me wanted to tell Mark to bring him home immediately. The rational part of me, however, was calculating vet bills, pet deposits, time commitments, and the very real possibility that our landlord would evict us if we violated our lease agreement. I told Mark we needed to talk about this when he got home. His response made my stomach drop. He was already on his way back with the puppy. When Mark walked through our door that evening, carrying a soggy cardboard box with the most adorable puppy I'd ever seen, I understood why he couldn't leave the little guy behind. The puppy, who Mark had already named Charlie, was even smaller and more pathetic looking in person. But I also noticed something that would become a recurring theme. Mark hadn't actually asked for my permission. He'd informed me of his decision and expected me to go along with it. We spent the next hour setting up a makeshift bed for Charlie in our bathroom, the only space we could safely separate him from Buster while we figured out introductions. I found myself getting swept up in the excitement despite my concerns. Charlie was undeniably adorable, and Mark seemed so happy and proud of his rescue mission. That night, as we lay in bed listening to Charlie whimper in the bathroom and Buster pace anxiously outside the door, I brought up the practical concerns. Our lease explicitly stated 1 pet maximum. We were already stretching our budget with Buster's needs. Our apartment was barely big enough for the 4 of us. Mark assured me it would all work out. Charlie was just temporary until we found him a good home. He'd handle all the expenses and responsibilities. He'd talk to the landlord about adjusting our lease. Everything would be fine. I wanted to believe him. Mark had this way of making everything sound manageable when he was excited about something. His optimism was one of the things I'd fallen in love with. But I'd also lived with him long enough to know that his follow-through didn't always match his initial enthusiasm. The next morning, I woke up to find Mark had already taken both dogs for a walk and stopped by the pet store. He'd bought Charlie everything he could possibly need. Food, toys, a proper bed, leash and collar, treats, and even a little sweater because it was getting cold. When I asked about the cost, Mark brushed it off, saying it wasn't that much and Charlie deserved to have nice things. I checked our joint account later and discovered he'd spent over $300 without mentioning it to me. That's when I started to realize this wasn't going to be as temporary as he'd promised. To understand why Mark's impulsive puppy rescue worried me so much, you need to know about his history with animals. Mark had what I initially thought was a beautiful, caring heart when it came to pets. He volunteered at the local animal shelter, fostered kittens during kitten season, and always stopped to pet every dog we encountered on walks. But over the course of our relationship, I'd started to notice a pattern that made me uncomfortable. Before Buster, there had been 3 foster kittens that were supposed to stay for 2 weeks and ended up living with us for 4 months. Mark kept finding reasons why they weren't quite ready for adoption yet, or why the potential families weren't quite good enough. Then there was the injured bird he'd brought home and kept in our bathroom for 6 weeks, despite having no real knowledge of bird care. The bird eventually died, and Mark was devastated, but he'd refused to take it to a wildlife rehabilitation center because he was convinced he could save it himself. When we finally did adopt Buster from the shelter, I thought Mark would be satisfied. Buster was exactly the kind of dog Mark had always talked about wanting: loyal, intelligent, active. But even with Buster, Mark constantly browsed pet adoption websites, sent me photos of animals that needed homes, and talked about how much space we were wasting by only having 1 dog. Mark's sister had mentioned to me at a family barbecue that he'd been like this since childhood. Their family had ended up with 7 cats, 3 dogs, 2 rabbits, and a rotating cast of smaller pets because Mark couldn't bear to see any animal in need. His mother had laughingly told me that they'd had to institute a household rule: no new pets without a family vote, because Mark would otherwise bring home every stray he found. But we weren't his childhood family with a big house and yard. We were 2 adults sharing a small apartment, trying to build careers and save money for our future. The difference was that his family had learned to set boundaries with his animal-loving impulses. I was apparently expected to just go along with whatever he decided. What do you think so far? Am I being unreasonable about wanting some say in major decisions that affect our shared living space? Or should I be more supportive of my boyfriend's compassionate nature? The first week with Charlie revealed just how deep Mark's obsession with animal rescue really went. What I'd initially seen as compassion was starting to look more like compulsion. Mark couldn't focus on anything else. He called in sick to work twice to stay home with the puppy, despite Charlie being perfectly fine in his crate for a few hours. He set alarms every 2 hours throughout the night to check on him, which meant neither of us was getting any sleep. He joined 4 different Facebook groups for golden retriever owners and spent hours researching the best food, training methods, and toys. Our conversations became entirely about Charlie's eating habits, bathroom schedule, and developmental milestones. Meanwhile, I was dealing with the practical reality of having 2 dogs in a space meant for 1. Buster was acting out, clearly stressed by the new addition. He'd started having accidents in the house again, something we'd finally gotten under control months earlier. He was also becoming increasingly possessive of his toys and food, which created tension between the dogs. Our morning routine, which used to be a quick walk with Buster before work, now took an hour and a half. Charlie couldn't be left alone with Buster yet, so one of us had to stay home with him while the other walked Buster, then we'd switch. By the time we'd both gotten ready for work and dealt with both dogs, we were consistently late and stressed. I tried to talk to Mark about the impact this was having on our daily life, our sleep, our work performance. His response was that I was being selfish and that Charlie was just a baby who needed extra attention right now. But here's what really bothered me. Mark seemed to get an actual high from being needed by these animals. He'd light up when Charlie whimpered for him specifically, or when Buster chose to sit next to him instead of me. It was like he needed to be the hero, the rescuer, the indispensable caregiver. When I suggested we should start looking for Charlie's forever home as Mark had originally promised, he got defensive. Charlie was bonding with us, he argued. It would be traumatic to separate him from Buster now. We couldn't just abandon him after he'd started to trust us. Every reason I gave for why 2 dogs wasn't practical was met with an emotional appeal about Charlie's well-being. Mark made me feel like a monster for even suggesting that we couldn't keep him. I want to pause here and thank everyone who's still with me. I know this might seem like I'm just complaining about my boyfriend, but I promise the real dilemma is coming. Sometimes love makes us do things that aren't actually loving, and I need your help figuring out where that line is. By the 3rd week of Charlie's temporary stay, the financial impact was becoming impossible to ignore. Mark had initially promised to handle all expenses related to the puppy, but somehow those costs kept appearing in our shared budget. The emergency vet visit when Charlie ate something he shouldn't have cost $400. The professional dog trainer Mark insisted we needed for proper introductions between the dogs was $60 per session, twice a week. The upgraded food for both dogs, because Mark decided Buster deserved the same high-quality nutrition as Charlie, added another $50 to our monthly grocery bill. Then there were the hidden costs that Mark didn't seem to factor into his calculations. Our electricity bill spiked because he was leaving lights on for Charlie during the day so the puppy wouldn't be scared. Our water bill increased from the constant washing of dog beds, toys, and accidents. We had to hire a professional cleaner twice to deal with pet odors that our regular cleaning couldn't eliminate. I sat down with our bank statements one evening and calculated that we'd spent over $1,500 in 3 weeks on dog-related expenses. This was money we'd been saving for a security deposit on a bigger apartment, something we'd been planning for months before Charlie arrived. When I presented these numbers to Mark, he accused me of being materialistic and caring more about money than a living creature's well-being. He pointed out that we both had good jobs and could afford these expenses if we just adjusted our priorities. But here's what Mark didn't acknowledge. I was the one managing our budget, paying our bills, and tracking our savings goals. He earned about 20% more than I did, but contributed the same amount to our shared expenses, which meant he had more disposable income for impulsive purchases. I realized that Mark's generosity toward the dogs was partly subsidized by my financial responsibility. He could afford to be the hero because I was covering the practical costs he didn't think about. When I brought up the lease violation and potential eviction, Mark suggested we just look for a new apartment that allowed multiple pets. In Austin's competitive rental market, that would mean paying significantly more for significantly less space, plus losing our current security deposit and paying new deposits for 2 dogs instead of 1. The financial stress was affecting every aspect of our relationship. We stopped going out to dinner, canceled our planned weekend trips, and I found myself resentful every time I saw Mark buying yet another toy or treat for the dogs while I was clipping coupons and looking for ways to cut our expenses. Living with 2 dogs in a small apartment wasn't just affecting our relationship, it was affecting our entire building. Buster and Charlie together created twice as much noise, twice as much energy, and twice as many problems with our neighbors. Our downstairs neighbor, Mrs. Chen, started leaving passive-aggressive notes about the sound of dogs running around early in the morning and late at night. The thin floors of our older building meant that every game of fetch, every bout of zoomies, and every excited greeting when we came home sounded like a small earthquake to the apartment below. The couple next door complained to the management office about barking. Charlie had developed separation anxiety and would howl whenever left alone, which triggered Buster's protective instincts and resulted in both dogs creating a cacophony that could be heard throughout the hallway. Our upstairs neighbors started banging on the floor whenever the dogs got too excited, which only made the dogs more agitated and loud. I found myself walking on eggshells in my own home, constantly shushing the dogs, trying to keep them calm and quiet. It was exhausting and stressful, turning what should have been our sanctuary into a source of anxiety. The final straw came when our landlord called me directly, not Mark, me, to discuss the lease violation and noise complaints. Apparently, Mrs. Chen had been documenting the disruptions for 2 weeks and had threatened to break her own lease if the dog situation wasn't resolved. Our landlord was surprisingly understanding but firm. We had 30 days to either remove the second dog or find new housing. The pet deposit for 2 dogs would be an additional $500, and any future complaints would result in immediate eviction proceedings. When I told Mark about this conversation, his response floored me. He suggested we should just move rather than give up Charlie. He'd already started looking at apartments online and had found several places that allowed multiple pets. What he hadn't done was look at the cost comparison. The cheapest pet-friendly 2-bedroom apartment in our area was $400 more per month than our current place. Most required additional pet deposits totaling over $1,000, and many had breed restrictions that would exclude Buster. Mark's solution to every practical problem was to spend more money, adjust our lives around the dog's needs, and assume everything would work out. He seemed genuinely unable to understand why I wasn't excited about restructuring our entire living situation for a dog we'd had for less than a month. After a month of mounting stress, financial strain, and relationship tension, I realized I had to have the conversation I'd been dreading. We were sitting in our living room on a Sunday morning, both dogs asleep between us on the couch, when I finally asked Mark the question that had been burning in my mind. I told him I needed him to choose between keeping Charlie and keeping our relationship stable. Not because I didn't love Charlie, I'd grown attached to him too, But because his inability to consider my feelings or our practical limitations was making me question our entire future together. Mark's reaction was immediate and intense. He accused me of giving him an ultimatum and trying to control his compassionate nature. He said I was jealous of the attention he gave the dogs and that I was being manipulative by making him choose between his girlfriend and a helpless animal. But I wasn't asking him to choose between me and Charlie. I was asking him to acknowledge that major decisions affecting our shared life should be made together, not unilaterally. I was asking him to recognize that his impulsive rescues were creating problems that I was expected to solve without complaint. I explained that watching him prioritize his own emotional needs over our partnership was breaking my heart. Every time he dismissed my concerns as selfish or materialistic, every time he made financial commitments without consulting me, every time he promised to handle responsibilities that somehow became my problem, it chipped away at my trust and respect for him. Mark's response revealed something that shook me to my core. He told me that if I really loved him, I would support his passion for helping animals. He said that maybe we weren't compatible after all if I couldn't understand that saving lives was more important than convenience or money. In that moment, I realized that Mark saw my practical concerns not as legitimate partnership issues, but as character flaws. In his mind, I was the villain for not being as animal-obsessed as he was. He also revealed that he'd already submitted applications for 3 different apartments without telling me, using our joint financial information. He'd assumed I would go along with whatever he decided, just like I had with Buster, just like I had with Charlie. That night, I stayed at my sister's house to think. For the first time in our 3-year relationship, I seriously considered whether we had a future together. Word of our relationship crisis quickly spread to both our families, and the reactions were exactly what I'd feared. Mark's family, who had always seen his animal obsession as endearing, painted me as the heartless girlfriend who wanted to abandon a rescue puppy. His mother called me directly to express her disappointment. She reminded me of how much Mark loved animals and suggested that supporting your partner's passions was part of being in a committed relationship. She offered to help with expenses if money was really the issue, completely missing the point that this wasn't about affordability. Mark's sister posted subtle digs on social media about people who adopt pets they can't commit to, clearly referencing our situation, even though she didn't name names. Several of Mark's friends liked and commented on these posts, making it clear whose side they were on. My own family was more supportive, but in a way that created its own pressure. My mother, who had never particularly liked Mark's impulsive tendencies, saw this as confirmation that he wasn't mature enough for a serious relationship. She encouraged me to stand firm, but also hinted that maybe this relationship had run its course. My sister, who worked as a veterinarian, offered a more nuanced perspective. She explained that while Mark's desire to help animals was admirable, true animal welfare required realistic assessment of what you can provide. Keeping animals you can't properly care for isn't actually loving, it's selfish. But she also pointed out that I'd enabled Mark's pattern by going along with previous rescues without setting clear boundaries. She suggested that both of us had contributed to this situation by not addressing our fundamental differences in decision-making and responsibility. The most painful conversation was with my dad, who asked me a simple question that cut straight to the heart of the matter. He wanted to know if I trusted Mark to consider my needs and feelings when making major life decisions, or if I expected to spend our entire relationship managing the consequences of his impulses. I realized I couldn't answer that question in Mark's favor. While staying at my sister's house, I had time to reflect on our entire relationship pattern, not just the Charlie situation. What I discovered made me feel both validated and heartbroken. Mark's pattern of impulsive animal rescues was just one example of a larger issue. He was great at grand gestures and initial enthusiasm, but terrible at sustained responsibility and follow-through. With Buster, I'd gradually taken over most of the daily care. I was the one who woke up early for morning walks when Mark was too tired. I was the one who cleaned up accidents, scheduled vet appointments, and researched training methods. Mark loved the fun parts, playing, cuddling, showing Buster off to friends. But the mundane daily tasks somehow became my responsibility. The same pattern had emerged with Charlie. Mark had made the dramatic rescue, enjoyed the praise for his compassion, and basked in the puppy's adoration. But I was the one losing sleep, managing logistics, dealing with neighbor complaints, and worrying about our finances and housing situation. I realized that Mark's love for animals was genuine, but it was also somewhat selfish. He loved being needed, being seen as a hero, being the center of these creatures' worlds. What he didn't love was the boring, difficult, expensive parts of actually caring for them long-term. During my week away, I asked Mark to handle both dogs entirely on his own. No help with walks, feeding, cleaning, or anything else. I wanted to see if he could manage the full responsibility he'd taken on. By day 3, he was calling me in frustration. Charlie had gotten into the trash and made a mess he couldn't clean up properly. Buster had eaten something on a walk and needed an emergency vet visit that Mark had to handle alone. Both dogs were acting out because their routine had been disrupted, and Mark was overwhelmed trying to manage work and pet care simultaneously. When I returned to our apartment the following weekend to get more of my things, the scene was exactly what I'd expected. The place was a disaster. Dog hair everywhere, toys scattered around, food bowls that hadn't been properly cleaned, and a distinct smell that suggested accidents hadn't been dealt with promptly. Mark looked exhausted and defeated. For the first time since Charlie's arrival, he admitted that caring for 2 dogs was more work than he'd anticipated. That conversation in our messy apartment became the turning point of our entire relationship. Mark finally acknowledged that he'd been expecting me to handle the practical aspects of his animal rescue impulses while he enjoyed the emotional rewards. But his next words shocked me more than anything else he'd said during this entire ordeal. He asked if I would be willing to compromise by keeping Charlie if he promised to handle more of the actual care responsibilities. Not all of them, more of them. He still expected me to be his co-caregiver for animals I hadn't agreed to adopt. When I pointed out that this was exactly the same promise he'd made about Buster and had already broken, Mark got defensive again. He accused me of keeping score and not giving him credit for trying to do better. That's when I realized something crucial. Mark genuinely believed that his good intentions should be enough. He thought that wanting to help animals absolved him of the need to consider how his actions affected other people, including me. He also seemed to believe that because I'd gone along with his previous animal adoptions, I'd forfeited my right to object to future ones. In his mind, my previous accommodation was consent to whatever he decided to do going forward. I asked Mark if he could understand why making major life decisions without consulting your partner might be problematic, regardless of the good intentions behind those decisions. I asked if he could see why expecting someone else to handle the consequences of your impulses might be unfair. His response was that relationships required sacrifice, and that if I wasn't willing to sacrifice for the things that mattered to him, maybe we weren't right for each other after all. But I'd been sacrificing for 3 years. I'd sacrificed financial goals, living space, sleep, social activities, and peace of mind. What I'd never seen from Mark was a willingness to sacrifice his animal rescue impulses for our relationship's stability. The final revelation came when Mark admitted he'd already been in contact with 3 more potential rescue situations through his shelter volunteer work. He was considering fostering a senior dog whose owner had died, and there was a pregnant cat who needed a temporary home. Even in the middle of our relationship crisis, even knowing that his last impulsive rescue had created all these problems, Mark was still planning future rescues without discussing them with me. That's when I knew I had my answer. I moved out 2 weeks later. Charlie went to a wonderful family with a big yard and 2 kids who had been looking for a golden retriever mix. Mark fought the placement initially, but eventually agreed when our landlord made it clear that eviction proceedings would begin if we didn't resolve the lease violation immediately. It's been 4 months since our breakup, and I still get messages from mutual friends asking if I'm the heartless ex-girlfriend who chose an apartment lease over a puppy's life. Mark's version of our story focuses on my unwillingness to help an animal in need, not on the broader issues of communication and partnership that actually ended our relationship. I miss Mark sometimes. I miss his enthusiasm, his optimism, and yes, I even miss both dogs. But I don't miss feeling like my needs and opinions didn't matter in my own relationship. I don't miss being expected to solve problems I didn't create and manage consequences I hadn't agreed to. My therapist has helped me understand that this wasn't really about dogs at all. It was about respect, communication, and whether 2 people can build a life together when they have fundamentally different approaches to decision-making and responsibility. So am I the a-hole for not wanting my boyfriend to adopt another dog? Or was I finally standing up for myself after years of being treated like a supporting character in my own relationship? I genuinely want to know what you think. Have you ever been in a relationship where your partner's good intentions created problems you were expected to solve? How do you balance supporting your partner's passions with protecting your own well-being? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Sometimes the hardest relationship decisions are the ones that make you look like the villain, even when you know you're protecting your own sanity. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe for more real-life relationship dilemmas that don't have easy answers. And if you want to hear another story about love, boundaries, and impossible choices, check out my recommendation for the next video. Am I the a-hole for refusing to be my best friend's maid of honor after she excluded my boyfriend from her wedding? That one will definitely make you question everything you think you know about friendship loyalty. Thanks for listening, and remember, sometimes loving someone means knowing when to walk away.